Okay, most calculus textbooks give you some formulas to use when you're using trigonometric substitution, but in my opinion, it's easier to draw a little right triangle, labeling one of the acute angles theta, and then remember these two rules. You want to use sine, secant, or tangent, none of the other trig ratios. I just remember SST. And you want to use a ratio that does not involve the radical and places the variable in the numerator. So when you have the square root of 1 minus 100x squared, when you have two perfect squares separated by a minus sign, that first term is the hypotenuse. And then you have to decide where to place the square root of 100x squared, which is 10x. Do I put it here? Well, if I put it here, if I use secant, I'll get 1 over 10x, the variable is in the denominator. And by the way, if I put the 10x here, then the square root symbol would be here. If I use sine, I'd have the square root over 1. I don't want the square root. And if I use tangent, I'd have the square root over 10x. So I couldn't get rid of the radical. So that tells me that we want the 10x to be here and the square root to be here. Using the Pythagorean theorem, that's 1 squared minus 10x, the quantity squared, or 100x squared. And let's see, if I use sine, that's 10x over 1. That's what I want. Sine of theta equals 10x over 1. And so if you want to solve for x, just to give you an idea of the trig substitution, x would be 1/10 sine of theta. So x squared would be 1/100th sine squared theta. Do that substitution, you'll see that you can rewrite this in terms of theta without a radical. Okay, so in the cell, let me erase this down here. For the second problem, we're still two perfect squares separated by a minus. That means 5x is the hypotenuse. Where do we put the 6? If we put the 6 here, if I use sine, this would be the radical here. Sine would have the radical over 5x. Secant would have 5x over 6. Tangent would have the radical over 6. So it looks to me like the 6 should be here, and we should use secant. Secant of theta equals the reciprocal of cosine, so 5x over 6. You can solve that for x, square both sides, and you'll have something for x squared. Substitute it into this for x squared, and you'll see the radical disappears. And finally, for when you have two perfect squares separated by a plus sign, these are the legs. And the radical is the hypotenuse. So that tells me I can't use sine or secant because that would involve the radical. So I got to use tangent. And I want the variable to be in the numerator. So I'm going to put 4x here and 6 here. And the tangent of theta equals 4x over 6, or 2/3 x. Solve for x, square both sides, substitute. You'll see that in terms of theta, the radical disappears. Okay, there you go. Hope that helped. If you have any questions, post a comment.